Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dharati Swapadantikam. Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamstra Shri Rupam Sagadatam Sagana Raghunatha Mitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sate Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirshresha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, welcome to our continued study of this wonderful Bhagavad Gita. So, today we'll be concluding chapter 14, which is entitled The Three Modes of Material Nature. So, last week we concluded with Arjuna's three questions that Arjuna was asking about one who has transcended the modes. So, he asked, by which symptoms is one known to have transcended these modes? And Srila Baladevi Debhushana explains that that means how can we understand if we have transcended the modes? What are the perceivable facts from our own perspective that can tell us if we have transcended the modes? And then the next question was, what is his behavior? And that, means, how does one act? Are they acting according to their own desire? Is there some other impetus? How does he live? What are the activities of one who has transcended the modes? And then finally, how does one transcend the modes of nature? So how does it happen? So what are the symptoms? What are the behaviors? And finally, how do we actually do it? So Krishna is going to answer those questions now in the remaining verses of chapter 14. And we're very grateful that Arjuna has asked these questions because they give us great information about how to transcend the modes. So we'll read the first four verses. They're presented together. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O son of Pandu, he who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear, who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active, who is situated in the self and regards alike happiness and distress, who looks upon a lump of earth, a stone, and a piece of gold with an equal eye, who is equal toward the desirable and the undesirable, who is steady, situated equally well in praise and blame, honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, who has renounced all material activities. Such a person is said to have transcended the modes of nature. So we see now in the 22nd verse here, we get the symptoms of someone that has transcended. Now these symptoms are perceivable by the self, not by others externally, but by the self. And so these symptoms, Krishna is explaining in the 22nd verse. One does not hate illumination, attachment, or delusion when they are present, or long for them when they disappear. And so the main thing is we see is that we have transcended. We are fully neutral, neutral to the modes, fully aloof no attachments, no hates, or no desires. Hatred is actually a form of attachment also, because it is, I invest some energy in that hatred. So it's a negative form of attachment. Sometimes, we in devotional life, we get caught up in this, oh, I don't like this, I hate my iPhone, it's too distracting. Well, that's also a form of attachment. We should just learn how to use it productively. So equipoised is the key feature here. Take whatever we have as Krishna's carries. And how to achieve this, we'll see in the 26th verse. But this happens, we lose our consciousness of our body and transfer our consciousness to Krishna. This is when one can become truly aloof to the modes of nature. We can't lose our bodily consciousness unless we elevate our consciousness to something higher. Otherwise, it will remain fixed on the bodily platform. And when it happens, one doesn't need the body for pleasure, because pleasure, happiness is coming from a higher source. One who's on a bodily platform is constantly trying to satisfy all the desires for sense gratification, right? But when one has elevated their consciousness to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one's happiness becomes elevated to a higher platform, goes beyond the bodily platform. And thus, one becomes then naturally neutral to all the modes of material nature. So as long as we have needs from the bodily platform, we'll be affected by the modes of nature that will drive us to try to satisfy those sense desires. But when one comes to Krishna consciousness, this automatically stops, and that is the key. It happens actually automatically because one has become elevated to a higher platform, right? One becomes aloof to the bodily pulls and pushes, and it becomes like background noise, and one becomes very sweetly situated in the platform of devotional service. So one doesn't desire any longer to enjoy the body, nor does one desire to try to get out of this body. One doesn't again have a negative or, oh, I am miserable with this bodily features. No, one just focuses on serving Krishna, using the body as a vehicle to please the Supreme Lord, and remains surrendered to the will of Krishna. Krishna will do what he thinks is best. And so one doesn't work, one doesn't have to work to transcend the modes. It happens as a result of serving Krishna. It happens automatically. And so Prabhupada writes in the purport, I wanted to read, he says, thus transcendentally situated, the devotee becomes automatically free. He need not try to become free from the influence of the modes of material nature. And this is the power of devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada's, if you read Lilamrita and the final lesson, the end of Srila Prabhupada's pastimes here, there are an extraordinary illustration of how one has transcended the modes. Srila Prabhupada's consciousness and how he is viewing, the failing of the body and his final teachings is really, really a powerful lesson and an opportunity for all of us to see and observe this in real action. So this is the main symptom, that one becomes fully aloof and doesn't really pay any attention to the modes around us. They act, but they don't shake one's consciousness. So this is the key point, is that this is even possible within this body. So one can transcend the modes even while still within this body. And that is the beauty, is while still having this material body, by shifting our consciousness to the Supreme Lord and engaging in devotional service, one can become free from all the influence of the modes of material nature. And so, a way to illustrate this is, if you're driving a very nice car, then you no longer care or have any need for a bicycle. Whether one has one or not doesn't matter. It's a lower function. So, the living entity, when serving Krishna, doesn't have any needs or desires for the body. Simply happy from within, focused on serving Krishna. So this is the symptoms of one who has transcended the modes, who has gone to a higher plane. So in verses 23 through 25, now we get the answer to the second question of Arjuna, which is, what is the behavior or dealings of one who has transcended? Right? So in essence, we see they are unwavering and undisturbed through all different interactions with the modes. We see that one is very sensitive to all living entities, very soft-hearted, only cares about Krishna and devotional service. So no need for jewels or any kind of wealth. Has no friends or enemies, simply equipoised. So, and sometimes when we see this, situated equally in honor and dishonor, who treats alike both friend and enemy, it doesn't mean that one is aloof or insensitive. It actually means one is very compassionate and driven. Doesn't be, oh, they don't matter to me. That is not an important relationship. No, they act very compassionately to all living entities. So it is not that one becomes emotionally detached, but they don't have anything to gain from that relationship, nothing to acquire. And so they simply seek to give mercy, give compassion and love. And so, but they don't become affected or attached. Right? So if someone's treating us badly, there's no loss, because the one who is transcended, they have nothing to gain from that person. Again, are simply trying to give love and compassion, but they have no expectation in return. And so if there's nothing to gain, if nothing comes, there's nothing lost. And so one can become very neutral or equal in both friend and enemy, right? So this happens, if I'm looking to treat somebody nicely so that I can get some respect or some love or some money or something back, then I have potential to become dissatisfied. So the one who is transcended, they treat all of their relationships with simply an opportunity to give love and mercy. But again, no expectation in return, so thus there's no attachment. And that is how one can become even very equal to friend and enemy, which in the beginning of when we read this seems very hard or difficult or maybe even impossible. So the difference between these symptoms that we saw in 22 and the behaviors in 23 through 25 is a little bit subtle, but the symptoms are perceivable by ourselves, but these behaviors are perceivable externally by others. So this is something that we can observe in others around us. And overall, we see once the soul is liberated by understanding the modes through this knowledge, they become fully detached from all the pushings of the material modes of nature. Accepts everything that is favorable for Krishna and rejects everything that is not. That classic renunciation formula. And so no attempts are made for one's own sake. Everything is made for the sake of Krishna. And thus one becomes very equipoised. And we have many wonderful examples in our Shastra and in our experiences. Haridas Thakur was so detached, not even to being disgraced publicly in the marketplaces or being praised by someone like Advaita Acharya. He was fully equipoised. Srila Prabhupada so many times would show this equipoise. One common pastime of this is he was given a watch by one of his disciples, and he when he received the watch, he took off the watch he was wearing and gave it to him in exchange, and he received the new watch from his disciple. But he was trading a Rolex. Someone previously had given him a Rolex watch, and he had given that to the disciple in exchange for some Seiko watch, a basic watch. And you can see Prabhupada was not attached to the gold and jewels of that very fine watch. He simply was receiving the offering from his disciple out of love. And so in many instances, Srila Prabhupada showed this equipoised nature, detached from the material circumstance. When things were going well or not so well, he was very equal. Sanatana Goswami was keeping that touchstone that could produce gold under a pile of trash. When the devotee of Lord Shiva went to see Sanatana Goswami, he understood the importance of the holy names in comparison to even a touchstone that could produce unlimited amount of jewels. So the great devotees, they remain undisturbed by the pushing. They see pebbles and stones and gold all as the same. That's actually easier than being equipoised with honor and dishonor. You can detach from the need for wealth. It's very difficult to detach from the need for honor and dishonor. When somebody defames us, we become very agitated. Somebody glorifies, we become very pleased. Or seeing friends and enemies, we judge and adjust our actions according to whether somebody is friendly or inimical to us. So to become equal in those realms is even harder than being equal to just stones or gold. But when we transcend the modes, this becomes the natural, remember, automatic outcome because we are focused on a much higher platform. And so this is the result of one who has transcended the modes by both the symptoms and the behaviors. And so now Krishna will discuss how to do it. This is a very famous verse. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So how to transcend the modes? This was Arjuna's third question. And so we see, when one is doing bhakti, devotional service, again, automatically, all the symptoms from those prior 4 verses all the symptoms and behaviors, are exemplified. And Prabhupada writes that in the beginning of the purport, that all of those become automatically present by the performance of devotional service. Right? Because again, when we are focused on Krishna, we have naturally transcended the modes and become aloof to all of the lower platform activities that are happening. So the result is one comes to the level of Brahman. Right? So one immediately achieves this platform of Brahman, where their modes have no power to control. Just like if you're in a boat and your boat is in the ocean and the waves are going up and down, the boat is going to go up and down. But as soon as the boat comes just a foot above the water, the boat no longer goes up and down. The waves are still bouncing, but the boat remains very steady. Why? Because it has transcended the waves of the ocean. So similarly, when one transcends the modes in consciousness, they're no longer affected. Right? So, because the modes are not present at this higher platform. Right? So Brahman begins at the point which is beyond the modes. Now, this is where pure devotional service begins. The Shuddha Shattva, we talked about it last week, this mode of pure goodness. Again, in the mode of goodness, you're still within the modes of material nature. The ups and downs of the waves are there. But once we have transcended at least to this level of Brahman, it establishes the beginning point of towards full Krishna conscious realization, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it is in the mode of, beyond the mode of goodness into the mode of pure goodness. Right? So we see 2 key words here in this verse. The first is unfailingly. It means one-dimensional. One is constantly engaged in devotional service. And we've seen this feature in previous chapters, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 12, this unfailing in all circumstances, right? So one is only doing devotional service to Krishna. And Prabhupada comments in the purport that referring to Krishna also includes the different plenary expansions, such as Ram and Narayan. So this is Krishna in all of the expansions, but one is unfailing in their devotion to Krishna. And we know when we are serving Krishna, there is no scope to serve the modes because they are on a lower platform. And the second important point here is that Krishna says at once transcends the modes. The point is the result is immediate. We don't have to wait for another lifetime, a new body, or to go to some other place. No, it happens at once. And this is the very inspiring statement for us to take to this process of devotional service, because we can immediately become free from the modes of material nature. And we saw this in chapter 7, in the verse Daivi Mama Maya Duretraya, that one can even overcome the influences of Maya by surrendering to Krishna. He also said at that point, at once, immediately, one can transcend the influence of Maya. So we see this wonderful opportunity for us here. And Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan comments that this knowledge of how to transcend the modes and to engage in devotional service, it comes to the worship of the lotus feet of the spiritual master, of Guru. Because when one develops the service mood by serving the Guru, our enjoying mood, our sense enjoying mood is lost. This enjoying mood, trying to enjoy the material world, it is the glue that binds us to this material world and keeps us bound here forever. But when one is fixed in the service of the spiritual master, no matter what allurements may come our way, what temptations may be presented to us, there is no response due to the disciples' great joy and pleasure in serving the lotus feet of the spiritual master. So by serving the Guru, one learns how to ultimately serve and surrender to Krishna. This is the wonderful guidance that Srila Prabhupada references Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan's comments in the purport, towards the end of the purport of 26. So this devotional service, this bhakti, it is the eternal process. It is the process for the conditioned soul, one who is bound by the modes, to become free. And it is the process for the liberated, one who is already free. For the sadhaka and the siddha. The other practices, karma yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, ultimately they are given up and one elevates to the point of bhakti. But once one comes to bhakti, this is the eternal process. Even after being liberated from the modes of material nature, one remains fixed in devotional service. So it is the eternal constitutional position of the living entity, right? And so the progression in knowledge is that one comes to know about the modes, and then they analyze the action of various modes, and it leads one to serve Krishna and transcend them. The jnanis, they stop at the analysis of the modes. They understand that the modes are present, the material nature is distinct from spirit. But what doesn't work to get beyond them through service to Krishna. So the intelligent continues to the point of service to Krishna, and so when one engages in full devotional service, they transcend the modes. Right? So one question may come, which is, one comment before we get to the introduction of the next verse is that we see from this devotional service, three things come. This devotion or love, the realization of Krishna, this knowledge, and detachment from the modes of material nature. So they all are present by the practice of devotional service. So we see the very great power and potency of this devotional service. So one may wonder, why to the level of Brahman? That seems to be on the impersonal level. If we are engaging in devotional service to Krishna, shouldn't it be at the higher platform? Right? So that may be one question. So Krishna addresses this in the next verse, where he says, "And I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is a constitutional position of ultimate happiness." So here Krishna is linking this reference of Brahman to himself. He says he is non-different from Brahman. He is the basis of it. Just like the sun is the basis for sunlight. They're kind of one and the same. Krishna is the concentrated form of Brahman. Again, just as the sun is the intensified form of sunlight. So they are one and the same. But Krishna is the support or the foundation of this Brahman, and not the other way around. So Prabhupada comments in the purport very importantly that there are 3 stages of realizing the Supreme Lord. And one must come to the ultimate stage of Krishna realization, devotional service. Otherwise, there's chance of falling down. So he says one comes from Brahman realization to Paramatma realization, and from Paramatma realization ultimately to Bhagavan realization. But if one doesn't reach the Bhagavan realization and stays at the Brahman realization, there is chance to fall down because there is no engagement in service, and thus there is no reciprocation of love and of experience of great happiness. So until one comes to the platform of Bhagavan realization, one has potential to fall down. So one must elevate. But understand that this Brahman is directly connected with the Supreme Lord. So when Krishna said in the prior verse, one reaches a level of Brahman, it is the point of coming ultimately to Krishna. And we see in various pastimes, the 4 Kumaras, they began with an impersonal realization, but by the mercy of Krishna, they elevated themselves to the point of devotional service and in full Bhagavan realization. Because in devotional service, one gets to enjoy with Krishna. And in the impersonal realization, Paramatma realization, one is not yet fully enjoying the rasa with Krishna. And so there is always some challenge and obstacle until one comes to that platform. And remember, in Bhagavan realization, it includes whatever is realized from the impersonal level and from the Paramatma level. So it is inclusive of all. Just like if you reach calculus in math, you already know basic addition and subtraction and division and multiplication. It's all included. So similarly, when you reach Bhagavan realization, it includes all the features that are realized in Paramatma realization and in Brahman realization. So it is not separate or distinct, but it is a progressive stage. So in summary, the key is that we must lose, and Prabhupada writes this in the end of the purport, must lose this desire to lord over material nature, right? To dominate over material nature. This is the key. Our constitutional position, our eternal situation is not to be in this material nature, but to instead be in the spiritual world. But we lost that due to our desire to try to be master of the material world. And so this desire is lost when we engage in devotional service. And this is the key. So by associating with devotees, serving the spiritual master, and doing devotional service, the desire to dominate nature is lost. And thus one can transcend these modes and come to the platform of eternal blissful life in devotional service to Krishna. So this is the summary of this chapter. By studying the modes of material nature and how they are acting upon us, we can elevate ourselves at least to the mode of goodness, and from there transcend by engaging in devotional service, understanding that even in the mode of goodness I am bound, but Krishna is beyond the modes, and by serving him we can then elevate ourselves beyond the modes and come to this platform and thus enjoy eternal blissful life. And so thus Srila Prabhupada says, by studying this chapter, one naturally comes to the point of devotional service. So this is the understanding of the 3 modes of material nature and how to transcend them and what are the symptoms and behaviors of one who has transcended. Okay? Well, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Any questions or comments on today's verses? questions or comments, then next week we will begin discussing chapter 15, a very famous chapter we read during Purushottam Mas, Yoga of the Supreme Person, a very sweet chapter. So we'll begin discussing chapter 15 next week. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, everyone.